So they've told us what they have planned for our country. Late last night, President for now of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, who is still also President for now of the ANC, he addressed the world's media and told us that he and the ANC National Executive Committee have decided to create a government of national unity, or at least they're going to try to create a government of national unity with as many as possible of the political parties that ran against the ANC in the last election. So in this video, we're going to explore and explain what a government of national unity is, how it's been used before in South Africa, literally 30 years ago, if it will really happen, how it will happen, and why, in my view, this is a smart move from the ANC. This is The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. And this is the issue with GNU, the Government of National Unity, although apparently GNU is also what Americans call a wildebeest. For more on that story, David Attenborough is still alive. A government of national unity is essentially a coalition that is way bigger than it needs to be. So, as I'm sure you've heard a bajillion times by now from me and everybody else in the last few weeks in South Africa, when the biggest political party, the one that got the most votes in an election, gets less than half of the votes, below 50%, they need to go into coalition with one or a few other parties to get just the majority. So 50% plus one vote. The ANC only got around 40%, and so we've all been wondering, who are they going to go into coalition with? And we've all been figuring out which would be best for them, which would be best for the country, knowing full well that if the ANC chose to go with MK or the DA or the EFF, there'd be significant problems, challenges, and backlash from different parts of their voter base and the country to any of those decisions. They've chosen, at least to try, and do a government of national unity. The argument given, the idea is that if you get as many political parties in ruling, in government, in positions of power as possible, you create a government that represents the most voters, whoever they voted for. As many people, South Africans, as possible, you get their choice to be in government, and thereby you create unity by creating a government that represents as many South Africans as possible and hopefully tries to do good work for as many South Africans' interests as possible. Governments of national unity have been done before around the world. In South Africa, we've done it exactly once, in 1994, when the ANC, in the first properly democratic South African election ever, got way more than 50% plus one of the vote. They did not need to go into coalition with anyone to govern. In fact, they got more than 60% of the vote. They were by miles the biggest party. But they chose to go into coalition in a government of national unity with the National Party, the apartheid guys, and the IFP, right? The National Party got about 20% of the vote, IFP got around 10% of the vote, ANC got around 62% of the vote. So together, those three parties ruling represented more than 90% of all of the South Africans who voted. And when the ANC did it in 1994, by most accounts, it was to unify South Africa after being radically fundamentally divided and split against itself over hundreds of years of colonialism and decades of formalized apartheid. But this time it's different. This time the ANC is doing it because they have literally not got enough votes to rule on their own, to be in power. And I suspect this is the best way that they can get themselves out of a really tough fix. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So, who might be in the government of national unity? The idea is to include as many parties as possible. Ramaphosa said in his speech last night that he has already spoken to the EFF, the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, the PA, about getting them into government with him, trying to unify and collect as many of their votes as possible. Now, I have to tell you the current time of recording because things may change. It is 11:17 on Friday, the 7th of June. And I'm sure you're already thinking, Dan, problems. Is there really going to be a government of national unity when, in a very obvious way, you're inviting the DA and the EFF, who loathe each other, who describe each other as like the greatest evils? The EFF describes the DA as basically apartheid, white supremacy, white minority capital, all of the evils plaguing South Africa. The DA has likened the EFF to like the greatest evils, to the doomsday scenario, to the devil. Like they loathe each other. And already, last night, just a couple of minutes after Ramaphosa addressed the nation, Julius Malema tweeted something along the lines of, "We will not share power with the enemy." And it's not difficult to imagine who he meant by that. On the other hand, the DA has explicitly said that they will not work with the EFF in local government, in national government in the past, even though they've also said that with the ANC, and they've also had an about turn in the last handful of months saying that they'll work with the ANC to prevent the doomsday coalition, as they say, which is ANC, EFF, and MK. So already we're trying to imagine the EFF and the DA being in one ruling coalition. Then we need to think about the fact that they have radically different policies. So, and that's not just with the EFF, like that's with ANC and DA directly. Like, you know, the DA wants to do away with BEE and replace it with something called Sustainable Development Goals based whatever. EFF wants to strengthen minimum wage and spread social grants. DA wants to change social grants and with a view to making them less. And they also don't like minimum wage very much and think that a solution to the country's unemployment crisis is to do away with minimum wage. So already we're trying to imagine how they're going to work under the same roof. And that's just two of the parties of many parties that have been invited. The PA loathes the EFF. You know, DA loathes the PA. They've all been running on an anti-ANC ticket. It's really hard to imagine them all being in government together. And yet, I can see them all doing it, because they may now have a once in a generation possibility of getting into power. You need to remember the DA got only 20%. They are miles away from ever ruling, and they seem to have hit a glass ceiling. The EFF went backwards in this election. The PA got like, I think 2.5%, like I think less than 3%. So they are nowhere near to ever getting into government. And this is this once-off opportunity for them to get into a position of power, which is great for their political parties to get into government and to show that they can make a real difference. So their voters will go, oh, it is worth voting for these parties. But it's also great for these individuals, because on some level you can imagine John Steenhuisen having sleepless nights and a really, really excitable temperament thinking he could be vice president. Julius Malema the same. So we'll see. It's not certain that all of these parties will go into coalition with each other. One of them may blink and refuse to go into coalition and into government of national unity. A couple of them may blink, but they may all say yes and just go along with it. But there's one other really important thing that Cyril Ramaphosa said. He said, we have decided to make moves to isolate those who seek chaos. That's what he said in his address last night. And he has to be talking about the Umkhonto weSizwe Party and Jacob Zuma, who tried to reject the election. They said they weren't going to send their MPs to parliament. Now they are sending their MPs to parliament. They said they wouldn't negotiate unless Ramaphosa was gone. Now we're not so sure if that's going to happen. So government of national unity up to a point, right? Because I think the ANC is thinking we don't want to strengthen MK, we don't want to strengthen Zuma, and we don't want to have a chaotic ruling government. And so we're going to isolate those who only seek to cause chaos. So Ramaphosa is not exactly inviting everybody over. Now, we don't know whether or not this is going to happen, but why is this probably a really smart move for the African National Congress? Think about the options that they had, right? They could try and do a minority government, which would be painful, dysfunctional, embarrassing. They could try and do a coalition government, but if they just did a normal coalition, then they would have to say, we chose to work with this party or this party. They'd have to work with one of their rivals, DA, EFF, MK, at least one to get over 50%. And that would come with significant potential harms. If they went with the DA, people would say that's the end of the ANC. They've sold out to white minority capital. They've agreed with the great enemy. They've got them into power. It would be a problem. If they went into coalition with the EFF, a lot of the ANC would think, why are we helping the EFF? They're an offshoot of us that have taken away many of our voters. They threaten the future of our party, right? So that's a problem with the EFF. If they went with MK, I don't think I need to litigate again why that would be difficult. And so there was a problem for the ANC in going into coalition with any of these individual parties, right? But if they say, oh no, we're going to have a government of national unity, everyone's invited, then they shift the responsibility for who will be in the coalition on the opposition parties. Now, if the EFF or DA chooses not to be part of the coalition, that's their problem. That's their fault. The ANC invited everybody. And if either of those parties or any of the rest of them choose to be a part of the coalition, then the ANC will go, well, we invited everyone. These are just the people who said they were willing to work and be a part of government and creating and making South Africa a better place. So the ANC has dodged the bullet of choosing a coalition partner, and now they get to wait and see if any of these guys dip out on their own. It's a really, really politically smart move. And it also gives the ANC a sense of like the prestige, because now people are saying like this is 1994 all over again. One headline said Ramaphosa is doing like Mandela did, which he's obviously not. Like, obviously. This is a fundamentally different situation. The ANC would never be doing this if they got more than 50% of the vote. But it allows them to spin this as we are the great protectors, preservers, and champions of democracy. So It's a massive, massive, massive decision. We don't know how it's going to go. We're going to find out in the coming days. But yeah, government of national unity. Will it happen? At least now we know how it might. See you next week.